Yes, there was an update again today. For some reason, it keeps going to another default microphone from our Twitch producer for these channels. So for some reason, it just keeps flipping back to that. So anyway, sorry. Just wanted to tell everyone thanks for support. We have had the whole point of our branding for masterofdungeons.com and our Twitch channel here is to spread knowledge and information about Dungeons and Dragons for older players, new players, veteran players, etc. So we've had a few new people joining the community server, and on the community server we did, of course, we have our live play game on Sunday evenings where we're playing through the keys from the Golden Vault, and we had a few people apply with our player application that we put up there, and a few of them are writing in because they are not really sure. They've applied, but they haven't not really sure what the Adventurers League is, because we are playing Adventurers League rules on Sunday evenings. And tonight I was just going to answer a few of those questions that people might have about what the Adventurers League is, and basically where you can play and how you can play and join the Adventurers League. First, it's been 5th edition came out in 2014, and around then they started something I believe was called D&D Encounters that would take place at local game stores. Eventually they had more of a convention style of storylines that were called D&D Expeditions. And then of course from that evolved into the Adventurers League. Basically what the Adventurers League is a set of standard rules that everyone uses for D&D. And everyone plays by the same rules, and it allows you to have your character become portable, which means that you can play at your local game store with your character. You can take your character to a convention and play your character at a convention. You can take your character online, play online games. As you know, there's lots of different Discord servers that have run live D&D games. You can also play at home with Adventurers League, as long as you're using the Adventurers League rules. And to kind of go through those, I mean, we've got the in our Discord server. If you're not a member, down below in the About section, you can follow us. All of our social media links are down there, as well as our Discord server. Just click on the Discord panel, and it will take you to our server. But in the server, you'll have to select roles. When you go to select your roles, and make sure that you have selected the Adventurers League role, then you'll be able to get all of the documentation. I try to keep all the current documentation for Adventurers League on the servers. I do have a private D&D server, and then we do have our community server. And all the information, the newest versions of these came out in December. They're working on new stuff all the time, as they say for Adventurers League soon, trademarked. But the current version is from December of last year, which is version 13.0. And basically, they have a player's guide and they have a DM's guide for the Adventurers League. They also have a list of adventures that you can play for Adventurers League, a content catalog that hasn't been updated in some time, and I'll get to that eventually about why it hasn't been updated for a little bit. And then it's got guidance for different things. So basically, the rules of Adventurers League are rules as written. So you play the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rules as they're written. You can use just the basic rules that you can download for free, the PDF from the Wizards of the Coast website. If you want, you can use all of the printed materials for the Adventurers League, or for D&D. You can use the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Morty Kingdom's presents Monsters of the Multiverse. Those books, Monsters of the Multiverse has replaced Morty Kingdom's Tome of Foes and Volo's Guide to Monsters for the races for the Adventurers League. So you would refer to Monsters of the Multiverse if you're playing something from one of the older books. You also use the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide as well, but it lays out in the player's guide for the Adventurers League what you can play and all of that. And for the Dungeon Master, there are just a couple of small variants that are allowed in Adventurers League play, but there are most of the variants that are in the DMG are not available for Adventurers League play. It's just basically kind of think of the Adventurers League rules as DM's house rules. When you play D&D at your home games, if you're DMing, most DMs have a few little house rules that they use for their games. Like, for example, one DM might let players use inspiration as a reroll. You're not supposed to do that in Adventurers League because the rules as written is inspiration is used to give you advantage before you make your roll. So that's just an example of a small house rule that you couldn't change. But at the same time, as I mentioned, when you play with the Dungeon Master, every DM has their own house rules. It's just, I always tell everyone that the house rules that all of the DMs are using in Adventurers League is the Adventurers League rules. It's not as constraining as a lot of people think. As I mentioned, I usually have around 100 paid games a year, and played with hundreds, if not thousands, of players. And when we've played Adventurers League, no one seems to have any problems with it. I know that some newer DMs aren't really sure about what they can do and what they can't do, because there is a lot of DM, what's the word I'm looking for? Leeway for DMs to still run their games and feel like just a regular D&D game. Now for adventures that you can play, we'll get to like doing your character creation and all of that here in a little while, but the adventures that you can play, first you can play pretty much any hardcover that has come out from Wizards of the Coast. There's a few minor rules changes because there are different Adventurers League campaigns. There is basically a Forgotten Realms campaign where you can play most of the adventures, and the majority of the adventures for 5th edition are set in the Forgotten Realms that are legal for you to play for Adventurers League. There's also an Eberron campaign as well, so you can play in Eberron, and there's specific adventures that were written and are used for the Eberron campaign. There's also a new one. It's started a couple summers ago, but it's now kind of in full swing as they open up. They brought some new content for it. But there's a Ravenloft campaign, which includes like the Curse of Strahd, some Mist Hunter adventures, and things in the Domains of Dread. And then, of course, there is the new Dragonlance campaign, where you can play the hardcover from Dragonlance. Of course, there are a few different premier organizers that are writing different adventures for the Adventurers League, and also the Adventurers League players can write their own adventures using what's called Dungeon Craft, which is like a DC, is what's called DC, the coding of the adventure. As long as they follow the guidelines for writing Dungeon Craft adventures for Adventurers League, which they have guidance for as well, they can write their own adventures, and if they want to, they can even put them up to sell them on the DM's Guild. So outside of the hardcovers like Storm King's Thunder, Tomb of Annihilation, Keys from the Golden Vault, Candlekeep Mysteries, you can also not only play just the hardcovers, you can also buy Adventurers League adventures on the Dungeon Masters Guild. As I mentioned earlier, there was D&D Expeditions, where you'll see some of the codes for Adventurers League that say DDX at the beginning of that, and that's, I believe, the first 3 seasons. When I see season, it's just basically kind of goes along with whatever the hardcover adventure is. For example, season 1 was basically Tyranny of Dragons, which was Hoard of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. So that was like Adventure 1, Season 1. Princes of the Apocalypse was Season 2, Out of the Abyss Season 3, Curse of Strahd Season 4, so on and so on. They've kind of done away with the season, the term season, but if you hear the term season, that's basically what it means. And you don't have to play in one particular season playing adventures. You can play your adventures, you can play a Adventurers League adventure from the DM's Guild, and then you can go play a hardcover adventure, and that's all broken down in the player's guide for the Adventurers League. But you will also see stuff like a DDX module. A lot of them are also DDAL modules. or DDEX, I should say. You'll also see in some of the older adventures, little code at the beginning says, which is 3 C's. It'll say CCC and then such and such. Originally, that was supposed to mean convention-created content. So people would write Adventurers League adventures for specific conventions. Like there would be Ballman Games would write adventures for Gen Con. Gamehole Publishing would do adventures for Gamehole Con. And other different conventions would have their own adventures, and they get published out, and they become legal Adventurers League adventures. Then CCC turned around to be called community-created content, so that other people could write that, and then that's what's just now evolved into the Dungeon Craft content, the DC content. So again, making your characters is fairly easy. The only thing that's a little bit different is instead of like rolling your stats when you roll up a D&D character, you just actually use point buy, which is listed in the first few pages of the player's handbook. You have 27 points, and they've got points that you can spend there, or you can spend them how you want, or you can just take the standard array that's listed in there as well. You choose your alignment as you normally would, except for the fact in Adventurers League, you cannot be an evil alignment. They used to allow lawful evil back in the day, but now you cannot play an evil alignment. It's got to be lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good, lawful neutral, neutral, or neutral, chaotic neutral. So yeah, you have to play a non-evil alignment. You can choose a background from any of the legal rule books that you'll be able to use, which are again listed all in the player's guide. You can even use the custom background feature from the player's handbook. That as it describes it there. You can basically choose, like, make up kind of your own background, and then you make sure to select, the appropriate number of tools or languages, and then a couple of skills, and then take a background feature from one of the established backgrounds that's already been in a official published content, and then pick your equipment from an official published background as well. Of course, you don't have to choose a deity unless you're a cleric. The cleric always has to choose a deity, but it is not. They are not limited to the school or the domain that the deity is. So if you're playing a life cleric, you don't necessarily have to select a deity that has a life domain. But you must select a deity from the campaign that you're playing. So if you're playing Forgotten Realms, you have to pick a deity that's from the Forgotten Realms. If you're playing Eberron, pick a deity from Eberron, etc. You can choose factions if you want to. You can play like as a Zentarum, you can play as a Harper, Order of the Gauntlet, all of those 5. There's also a few other factions as well. They used to have a little bit more to do with the Adventurers League seasons than they do now. As they used to have things where you'd have secret missions and you could gain extra renown. Renown isn't really something that is used very much in Adventurers League anymore, because you used to have to pay for your monthly lifestyle and things like that for your character, which they've kind of done away with as well. So basically, in Adventurers League, there are just like it's mentioned in the normal in the player's handbook for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there are tiers. 1st through 4th levels tier 1, 5th through 10th levels tier 2, 11th through 16th levels tier 3, and of course 17th to 20th is tier 4. Each one of the adventures are keyed to if you pick up an adventure from the DM's Guild, each one of the adventures is for a specific tier. So if it's a tier 1 adventure, anyone can play if you're 1st through 4th level. So a 1st level character might be playing with a 4th level character while they're playing that adventure. If you're doing it at a local game store or you're doing it at a convention, you're definitely going to see a lot of, and online, you're going to see a lot of different disparity, and not huge disparity, as long as they're the same tier of characters. And a question that people might ask is, well, if we're playing a tier 2 adventure for the keys from the Golden Vault, why do we have to be at the exact level? We're just doing that for show purposes, so it doesn't really unbalance anything, because we really not want someone to come in to play a adventure that's designed for 6th level and come in with a 10th level character that basically makes the adventure really, really simple and easy, as each one of the adventures in Keys for the Golden Vault is for a specific adventure level for the players. So we want to keep that just to keep the story straight and make it easier for preparation and for the show and such. One thing you do have to keep track of for Adventurers League as a player and a DM, you want to keep what's called a log sheet. Again, there's in the Discord server, you can download a PDF of that. You can also download all of this information also at the Wizard of the Coast website. Just do a search, Google or Bing, whichever you use, Yahoo, and just search Adventurers League, and the Wizard of the Coast site will pop up where you can get a lot of the Adventurers League information. It's also a great site called adventurersleaguelog.org, I believe, or .com, which the guys are really great to put that together. If you have a chance to donate to them, try to. But they maintain a site where you can keep all of your Adventurers League logs online, and you can print them off too. So if you need to print them off to take them to an in-person place, the majority of the time a DM's not really going to ask you for your Adventurers League logs unless something really crazy happens. Like if you're trying to say that you have a Holy Avenger at 3rd level, well, you can't have that. But there's no possible way you could have gotten that. So they're obviously going to check your logs for that. Leveling is fairly easy as well for your characters. Basically, at the end of each session that you complete an Adventurers League adventure or part of a D&D adventure, you can level up. For example, that most of the adventures are going to what's called the milestones instead of giving out actual XP anymore. Basically saying, oh, once the characters get past this part, they'll level up, or once the characters get past this part, or before they go to this part, they'll level up to they'll level up to 4, they'll level up to 5, and for Adventurers League, you want to definitely do those for the hardcovers. But for a regular Adventurers League adventure, once you complete that adventure, most of them are about 4 hours long, some of them are 2 hours, some of them have the option to be 6 to 8 hour adventures that you can play over a couple of sessions, but those do give you a chance to level up every time. The really cool thing about Adventurers League is that as a player, you can whenever you want, you can rebuild your character. The only thing is, and they used to make it to where you have to have the character have the same name, but you keep the adventure logs for that character and you just rebuild it. So say you have a 10th level rogue, and you're like, oh man, I might be tired of playing a rogue, which you shouldn't be tired of playing rogues. Rogues is the best class. But say you wanted to go ahead and say, I'm done with my lawlessness, I want to become a paladin. You could rebuild your character, keeping your Adventure League logs, and rebuild your character as a 10th level paladin if you wanted to. Now you don't get any access to new items gained from your class features and things like that, because when it comes to like wealth and such like that, your characters don't start off with any gold other than what's in their background, and you get the starting equipment from your class equipment in the player's handbook or wherever you're getting your class from, like if you're playing an artificer or something of that nature. So yeah, you start off with just your basic equipment from your class equipment, and then you get whatever gold, starting gold from your background. Now, if you watched our session 0 of our campaign for Keys from the Golden Vault, you can use the life events and such from Xanathar's Guide to Everything to make your character, give yourself a little bit of flavor, kind of give yourself basically some prompts to create your character's background. The one thing I would mention though, that it's great to have that backstory, but don't be too disappointed if when you're playing Adventurers League that the Dungeon Masters aren't necessarily putting a lot from your character's specific background into it, because of the fact that it is portable. You're not always going to play with the same Dungeon Master. You can at certain events and things. If you go to conventions or you go weekly to your store, the Dungeon Master might be able to add some of those elements from your background into the story. But don't be surprised or disappointed if it doesn't happen, especially playing online or at a convention. Another thing too is that after there's basically what's called a kind of a meta currency in Adventures League. It's called downtime days. Every time you play a D&D session, you gain 10 downtime days, and you have to with downtime days you have to do they're there for certain reasons. Like, for example, if you want to trade magic items, you have to spend downtime days. You and the person you're trading magic item with need to spend downtime days to do that. If you're a wizard or someone that can copy spells, like a ritual casting warlock or something like that happens to have a book, shadows or whatever it's called, and you have to copy spells. You follow the rules for copying spells in the player's handbook, like spending the amount of coin and such. And then basically, if you spend a downtime day, that gives you 8 hours of copying. So generally, a spell will take an hour per level. So if you were copying an 8th level spell, you'd spend one downtime day to have that 8 hours to copy spells. So that's what the downtime's for. Plus, you can use the downtime days for things like, for example, you can learn new languages and tools in the rules for D&D, and that's what the downtime days are spent for as well. Some adventures will even have special things that will allow you to spend downtime days on to add to the character. Magic item wise, for a player, you get to keep every magic item that you find in an adventure, and not just at the end of the adventure there's a +1 sword. Well, everyone at the end of the adventure gets a +1 sword, and you add it to your mountain of magic items. If a consumable like a potion of healing is not used during the session and is still around at the end of the session, everyone gets a potion of healing. Now, the difference is that you can only carry so many magical items to the table, depending on what your tier is. So, for example, you have common magic items like a moon touch sword, or a cape of billowing, or armor of smoldering, or something like that. Those are common magic items, like from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Then consumables are things like an oil of slipperiness, or a potion of heroism. Even look at your I believe magic ammunition as consumable, because once you fire it, it's gone. You also have, then of course you have your uncommon, your permanent magic items that are uncommon, rare, very rare, and legendary. So at tier 1, which is 1st to 4th level, you can bring 1 uncommon or higher magic item with you. And you can bring up to 5 common magic items and up to 5 consumables. So like you can bring 5 potions with you. And then those levels, those numbers will go up as you get into higher levels. Tier 2, you can bring 3 uncommon or higher magic items, and your consumables goes up to 10. And then at tier 3, you get 6 uncommon or higher magic items. And then tier 4, you get 10 uncommon or higher magic items, and your consumables go up to 15. So it basically kind of sets it up to where the character's not coming in with like a bazillion magic items. They have this, they have that, they're full on their attunement slots with everything. They want to change out and stuff like that. It kind of makes it to where it's more about the story and the adventurers having fun and being heroes and such like that. Could you clarify on the rebuild rules for character names? They actually, in the newer, the most recent one in December, when it talks about your character rebuilding, it says whenever you like, you can rebuild your character. However, you only retain equipment and magic items earned by adventuring and lose access to any items gained from the class feature. If you rebuild back to that class, the previous class, you regain access to those items. I don't believe there is anything about having to keep the name of the character anymore. At least there's not anything in the documentation. It used to be that if you rebuilt your character, you would have to keep the same name. But as long as you keep it on your log sheets and say, hey, I rebuilt the character and this is their name now. You know what I mean? Sometimes you'll have different certificates. I'm not sure they really addressed it too much in this one. The older there's more information on the when the new FAQ comes out, the FAQ, which will have and clarify a few things here and there. But there's not really a whole bunch of certs really in use anymore, just because there used to be what was called a player handbook +1 rule, which meant that the players could create their character with a player's handbook plus one other supplement. Like back in the day, if you wanted to use Volo's Guide to Monsters in the player's handbook, you could do so, but that would also prevent you from using things from Xanathar's. So they went ahead and got rid of that rule a few years back, which all the players really loved for that. Yeah, I think Ulysses, you don't have to keep the same name, as it's not written in the documentation anymore. But if you do change the name, obviously you'd want to jot that down in your Adventurers League logs. Hey, rebuilt from this class to this class, or this multi-class, or whatever you rebuild to, and change the character's name to this. So as long as it's in your Adventurers League logs, I would not see an issue with it. But yeah, so everyone gets a copy of the magic items at the end of the session, which is also sometimes really good for, if, like, for example, until you get some consumables built up to where you can, like as a fighter, you want to be able to bring all your potions of healing or heroism or vitality and such to, hey, you found a scroll, bring the scroll with you, because you're not going to be able to use it unless you rebuild, of course, but you can always give that scroll, lend it to someone else at your table, and they can use it for that session. And if it's consumed, then it's gone. You just take it off your character sheet. But it's really good for, like, if you go to play at a table with a wizard and you've got a spell scroll of magic missile and they don't have magic missile yet, you say, hey, borrow this for the adventure. Then they can spend the downtime and copy it, and then you don't have to worry about having a scroll that you can't use anymore. You can also lend magic items permanent magic items to players while they play, and they just automatically revert back to the owner at the end of the session. Now, sometimes you'll get, of course, coin and treasure. You'll get gold pieces and such like that after every session as well from the adventure. The adventures that have any specific gold listed in there, as some of them do. Which was a weird time in Adventurers League, but there is a new setup for the DM to make sure that everyone gets gold at the end of the session. Of course, if you find mundane mundane items like a burglar's kit or smith tools and such like that, the party can divvy them out at the end of the play session, or they can just take the mundane items and sell them. And basically, when you sell stuff, according to the rules as written, you sell it for half price. So you sell the mundane equipment half price, and you split all of that gold between all of the players. Sometimes you might get something that's called a story award from an adventure. And what those story awards do is those lend to future adventures in that storyline adventure that you might be playing. For example, if you're playing the season 10, which was the Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden, you'd get a few story awards here and there that come into play later on in that series of adventures, DDL adventures that was written to go along with the hardcover. Let's see here. Now this is the part where more hardcore players might not really enjoy as much when it comes to the Adventurers League, but during sessions of play, if your character dies, or you're subject to a lingering effect like a disease or a curse, or removed from the adventure, you deal with the consequences for the duration of session play. At the session's conclusion, you may choose the following. You can return your character to life or remove the negative effect. It's that simple. If you are removed from the adventure, you gain rewards until that you earned until you're removed from the play. And you can still gain a level. So if your character dies during the adventure, and there's no way for someone to cast like Raise Dead, Revivify, or Reincarnation, Resurrection, anything like that, and your character dies and they're not able to pay for those services themselves, then you have to sit out the rest of the session, but at the end of the session you just return your character to life. If you get a disease during the game, like lycanthropy or anything like that, like if you get bit by a werewolf or something, nope, you don't get to play a werewolf. At the end of the session, you just remove that from the character, remove that negative effect. And of course, if your character dies, you can just retire the character, succumbing to your fate, and just, that's what happened, and just make a new character. Now, when you make characters for Adventurers League, there are 2 different levels you can start off with. You can start off at first level, which is the standard character, or if you want to start off in higher play, you can create a 5th level character, which is the start of tier 2. But you cannot do any leveling outside of actually playing adventures. Dungeon Masters do get Dungeon Master rewards, where they're able to level up characters and such like that, applying some of their rewards to those characters. To making a new character. I've got so many different insane Dungeon Master rewards. It's pretty crazy. Probably could make a level 28 character of everything, but hardly ever use them because I really don't get to play that often. So that's Death and Disease, basically. Between play sessions, of course, as I mentioned, the downtime. You can also spend downtime to gain levels, however. You get 10 downtime days per session that you play. And of course, if you level up to 2, then you can spend those 10 downtime to go ahead and gain a level. So you could level up to 3. Then you play another adventure. At the end of that, you get 10 downtime days. So you could level up to 4 at the end of that adventure and then spend 10 more downtime days and level up to 5. So you're basically going to have to play a couple adventures to get up to level 5 anyway. You can also brew potions, like in the crafting items and Xanathars. Basically, a work week is considered 5 downtime days for purposes of brewing potions. You can also scribe spell scrolls yourself. Plus, you can also, like I said, trade magic items. My apologies, it's only 5 downtime days to trade magic items. So say here in chat, Ulysses had an uncommon magic item that he wanted to trade off, and I had an uncommon magic item that I wanted to trade off, and we both wanted to trade those items with each other. We just put it in our log sheets that we traded, and we both spend 5 downtime days to trade that. Now, it is important to know that you can only trade magic items of the same rarity. So if you have an uncommon magic item, you can only trade another uncommon magic item. And you can't trade a consumable for a permanent. You can only trade permanent magic items. And then one other note about magic items is to remember that legendary items like a Holy Avenger, things like that, are limited only to tier 4 characters. Now, if you find one in the adventure, before you get to tier 4, you still get to keep it, still get to put it in your magic item hoard. However, you're not going to be able to use it until your character's at least 17th level. Once you get to 17th level, that'll open up and you'll be able to use that. And as I mentioned, the trading of magic items is a 1-for-1 basis of the same rarity. They did used to have what are called certificates for magic items. At the end of the session, at the end of the adventure, the Dungeon Master would pass out certificates for everyone to show what magic items that they received the magic items. And I've got tons of those certificates as well. So if you have a certificate, you also have to trade it to the person, or it has to be destroyed. And of course, you do have to be playing in the same campaign setting, Forgotten Realms to Forgotten Realms. You can't trade something from Eberron into, into the Forgotten Realms game. You can't trade something from Ravenloft into to another character of the Dragonlance campaign. You have to all be in the same campaign world. And again, like I mentioned, the 4 different campaign worlds: Forgotten Realms, Eberron, Ravenloft, Dragonlance. They didn't really mention anything for Critical Role for the Call of the Netherdeep, mostly because that is specifically, I believe, a Baldman Games a specific thing that we do for the virtual D&D weekends, and I think that campaign's pretty much finished up, and I'm not sure if they're going to be adding any new content to that. But that might be just an extra, just a small leave out from the player's guide. But as I mentioned, we do have the Adventurers League discussion channel on our Discord page, so on our Discord server, community server. So if you have questions, there are lots of great AL players, experienced AL players, experienced AL DMs on the server already, and they will be sure to help you out if you have any questions. And I do my best to try to get in there to answer questions when people need help. But most of the time, we have a very knowledgeable base of Adventurers League players and DMs in the community. So if you have questions about that, about AL, they'll definitely be able to help out with those. So that is basically the player side. From the Dungeon Master side, let me go ahead and pull this up here and be able to help with some information. Again, this one, this Dungeon Master's DM's Guide for Adventurers League also came out as version 13.0 from December of last year. Basically, if you want, like I said, you just need the basic rules for D&D basic rules, a PDF document that you can get for free from Wizards of the Coast. You also, of course, you can use the player's handbook. It's got rules in there for playing D&D just out of the player's handbook itself. You really don't have to have the DMG, especially if you're a newer player starting off and you want to play some D&D with your friends. Of course, I would recommend getting the starter set, one of the starter sets that are out there. Of course, you have to have players. Now, play is designed for five people. Most of the adventures are designed for a group of 5 players. You can adjust down to 3, and you might even move up to as many as 7 players at a table. You could technically, you could really play with 1. It is not recommended that you do, like a DM and a player. It's not really recommended that you play with 1 or 2 people, but it's not something you have to follow. If you want to play with just like 2 people, like for example, we've had a couple of the sessions where Dontian was not able to make it the sessions due to outside circumstances, so it was just Otter and Design Lizard playing their character along with an NPC that I brought in for those types of situations. Other options, of course, you need to find your players, either with your friends, go to your local game store, look for players online. Roll20 and all the different VTTs usually have a way to meet other players online, looking for groups and stuff. Some other optional items that you can use. Keep in mind, if you don't have the monster manual, the majority of Adventurers League adventures will have the stat blocks of the monsters at the end of the adventure. That way, if you don't have a monster manual, you do have the stat block for those creatures at the end of the adventure to let the DM know, hey, here's what the stat block is for this creature, if you don't happen to have any of the books that those monsters are from. Obviously, the Dungeon Master's Guide is very valuable advice for DMing. If you want to use a screen, you can use a DM screen. Playing live, I generally do. Using VTTs, that's basically is when something whispers a roll to the DM, that's kind of acting as the DM screen. I don't use that online, but in person, in live games, I do use a Dungeon Master screen. Man. If you want, you can use miniatures. You have tons of great miniatures from WizKids that works with Wizards of the Coast now, and they have lots of pre-painted plastic miniatures. You can go obviously to Hero Forge and get some custom printed miniatures that are fairly affordable as well. You can get different maps. There's all different types of write and wipe maps that are out there. There's play mats as well, large play mats with like a hex grid on one side and a graph paper grid, just a regular grid on the other side that you can use to write and wipe from your adventures. They also have great dungeon tiles that are out there. If you want to use, I believe it's called Warlock, is one of the less expensive tile units that are out there. There's also Dwarven Forge that are really great quality, different things that you can actually kind of set up 3D terrain for your character or for your players as well. We had last year when we had the conclusion of the Moonshae trilogy, or the Moonshae Rising Shadow storyline for Bowman Games. One of our great DMs made, Grant Ward made a rather large, huge piece of this mountaintop, snow-covered mountaintop that was in the conclusion of that storyline in Moon 20. And we took that live to Gen Con, and for all the tables, each got a section of that to defend and fight what they had to fight in there, which is really cool. So you can even make your own terrain if you want. And that's not just for AL, that's obviously for all D&D as well. Again, as I mentioned, you don't have to be all of the same level as long as everyone's of the same tier. and I already explained the whole situation with why we want for the live play sessions that we stream for everyone to be of the same level. That way there's not any huge power gap, and everyone's pretty much playing on an even keel. As I mentioned, we already talked about the adventures that are available. As I said, you can play the hardcovers. Some hardcover adventures are only specifically for the different campaigns. As I mentioned earlier, Curse of Strahd used to be a Forgotten Realms game. Now, since they came out with the Ravenloft campaign, Curse of Strahd has switched over to the Ravenloft campaign. For example, you cannot play Forgotten Realms characters and then try to play the Dragonlance hardcover. You can't do that. Like, for example, Spelljammer. The Spelljammer box set that came out, that's considered Forgotten Realms. And again, those are all mentioned in the player's guide and what campaigns are what. Of course, the most important thing as a DM in Adventures League is to remember you're there for fun. A lot of times you also have to remember that, especially if you're playing at a convention or you're playing online for organized play conventions that like bring, you know, like say you might want to go run for Gamehole Con online, or this week GaryCon online or something like that. Always remember that the players are paying to play these games. You might be getting some other sort of compensation, but when you are playing with people that are paying for those, keep that in mind, because, and of course, all the time you should always make sure as a DM for normal D&D and AL that you're doing it for fun and making sure that the players are having fun. If your players are having a blast and you're not, then that might be something to figure out, because if your players are having fun, that's, in my opinion, again, these are all just my opinions, just how I look at things, but if your players are having a great time, that means you're doing a great job and you should be having a great time. If your players are miserable but you're having a great time, you need to, in my opinion, maybe you might want to look at your DM style and maybe change some stuff up. But also as a DM for Adventurers League, you're empowered to make decisions about how the group interacts with the adventure. You can adjust or improvise the adventure, but maintain the adventure's spirit. You got the setting you have to keep, the general story, the prominent NPCs should remain the same. Like for example, if the adventure introduces a character to an NPC named Scorn, you don't want to change that NPC's name. You don't want to change anything about that NPC, because when they go to play another adventure in that series and you've gone off the page from the other adventure trying to improvise stuff that you shouldn't be empowered to do, they're not going to know what's going on. So you can change stuff around. You can change how the group interacts with the adventures. You can adjust stuff. You can change DCs if you want. You can change the different types of monsters that they fight, as long as they're kind of theme appropriate, and the setting and the general story and the NPCs are largely the same. You can, like, less important things like time of the year, minor NPCs, stuff like that. Weather can be tailored to your to the table you're playing with. If they mention that there's a messenger deliver something, feel free to create your own NPC for it. I mean, don't make them the main part of the story. Definitely want to use the setting, the story, and the NPCs that are presented in the adventure, but feel free to change things up a little bit. Now, how you challenge the players is definitely up to you, and I always like to recommend that the Dungeon Master find out what type of play that the characters want before, and this is just in general D&D as well. If they want a really tough experience, it's more combat heavy. If they want more of a role-playing experience, if they want more exploration and puzzles and stuff like that. Now, the other thing too is that you do want to challenge the players to have it, and challenge them as they want to be challenged, not as you think they need to be challenged. Because it's become very, very odd to me that lately it's someone mentioned something about, why is it taboo to kill player characters? And I'm like, it's not really taboo. It's just, if you result to, I don't understand how a total party kill or a TPK has become a badge that you should be proud of, and how I would, react to that statement. As some of my players were discussing something on happening on the Twitterverse about someone asking that question. And my question back would be, why do you think that TPK is a badge of honor? That just means if a DM TPKs and kills the whole party, that just means that they're not doing their job as a storyteller and the person that runs the game. You basically just end up wasting a lot of the time of the players. Now, if it's great and it's something that happens rarely and it's part of the story, yeah, that's really cool. You make something great out of it. If you just do it because you're not sure, or you're not watching out for your players or watching the characters or following the story, that's something a little bit different. But it is, of course, the intent of Adventurers League is to have a collaborative, challenging storytelling experience. There are ways, lots of notes and the DM tips at the end of your adventures for DMs to adjust to your party strength. There's basically very weak parties, normal parties, strong parties, and very strong parties. So every adventurer has what's called an APL, which is the average party level, which you can check there, and you can double check. Yes, my my familiar is awakened. But you can check what levels are, how many players you have, what the levels are of your party, average that out, and that'll give you the APL of the party. And you can look at the APL of the adventure and adjust and let yourself know. Yep, there she is right back there. Then you can adjust the adventure to know what the strength is of the characters. And then in the adventures, especially that are written for specifically for the Adventurers League, there are adjusting the counter sections that give suggestions. Again, they're just suggestions of what to change. If you're an experienced dungeon master, it'll quickly be apparent to you how to adjust certain things, adjust hit points, maybe lower an AC a little bit, or make some of the rules easier, or maybe give them max hit points if it's a really strong party, something like that. That's one of the things I always tell DMs too about the adventures is raw means rules as written, not necessarily run as written. If there's small little things that you want to change in your adventures, you are empowered to do that for the Adventurers League. However, again, you want to keep the setting, the general story, the prominent NPCs, keep them largely the same. For example, we had a DM that was running the conclusion. I don't want to give any spoilers away. That was running a conclusion of last season's Dreams of the Red Wizards, DRW 20. It's called The Death of Sass Tam. And the DM apparently did not read the full thing at the end of the adventure. So one of the other DMs that was playing this came back and says, "Why is this so different than this season's adventures? This and this and this is supposed to have happened. How is this even possible?" And I was like, well, that's not what happened. Your DM went off the rails a little bit, which is why you don't want to change the setting, you don't want to change the NPCs, and you don't want to change the story, because if you go overboard, then the players aren't going to get the same story and that they're supposed to get, regardless of what DM they're running, where they're running the content at, and what content they're playing. Now, there are certain times where the player might bring something, a few pieces of different gear, like a disruptive magic item or anything like that. You're free. The player's not just saying, well, I can play with whatever I want. Yeah, they can say that. But the DM always has the right to refuse a player at their table. I would not recommend doing this very often. Definitely figure out a way to speak with the players, to talk with them, to build a rapport with the players, so that they know that, for one, you're going to give them a great experience. For another, they know that you're not going to allow them to do certain things. Like, for example, I had a couple of players that came to my table at Gamehole Con 2018. They both sit down as Gnome Rangers. And before we get started, I said, "Hey guys, we've got a question for you." They said, "Yeah, what's up?" I said, "Are you both using longbows?" And they said, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, you can go ahead and do that, but I just want to let you know that if you're a small creature and you're using a heavy weapon," which a longbow is a heavy weapon, "you have disadvantage on your attack rolls with that." And they didn't realize that. And I said, "Now, I don't have a..." They immediately said, "Oh, no problem, we'll switch to short bows right now." But I said, just because, I just want to let you know, because other DMs might be a little bit more stickler about that, or get angry, or something like that. So just try to build a rapport with the players so that they know when you sit down to the table that you're wanting to have fun and they're wanting to have fun. There are going to always be those disruptive players that are more wanting to make sure that they're having fun at the expense of other players. So temporary, even like I have a player that comes to some of my tables at virtual D&D weekends that has an extremely overpowered 10th level character that is at the very end of tier 2, and a lot of players not a lot. There's a few players that don't really enjoy the games when that character is there, because the character is extremely overpowered, legally of course. So what I do is I just talk to the player ahead of time, say, hey, let's go ahead and scale this back a little bit, so that way everyone's having fun with the adventure, and the player has no problem doing that whatsoever. It's just that the dungeon masters never really approached them and said, well, don't bring this magic item, or only use this level of spells, because 10th level character has access to 5th level spells, but everyone that's playing this adventure is only 5th level, so that's definitely going to give a difference in the balance of the game. And just talk to the players. Now, obviously, if the player's belligerent or very disruptive or anything like that, definitely go to the your store owner, whoever's running your games, whoever's the organizer of the events and convention, things like that, and talk to them and let them know that the player is being disruptive, or what the problem is or issues with the player, and then let them handle it. Let them deal with it. So yeah, as I mentioned, just trying to be cool and respectful with the players, and they're almost all the time. It's really nice, respectful, and they understand as well. There are a few things that you want to also keep the game moving. You don't want to get it bogged down. You don't want to pay attention, just like normal D&D. You don't want to pay attention to just one player too much. You don't want to let a player hog the spotlight, as it were. There are, of course, spell casting services that are available to the players during the session and between sessions. Talks about downtime activities in the Adventurers League Dungeon Master's Guide as well. It does walk through in that guide as well the different variant rules you can use, like playing on a grid, skills with different abilities, simultaneous effects, falling, sleep, adamantium weapons, tying knots, tool proficiencies, and spellcasting, all those different ones that are variants that you can play. Like, for example, even creating a character, you can use the variant human. You can also use the variant from Tasha's, where you create your own species or race. It also goes a little bit more in depth for the character rewards for the DMs to help better explain it. It also has a chart for, like, if an adventurer doesn't have a certain amount of gold. Like season 8, they were doing a very odd experiment, so there was no gold in the adventures. And I think somewhat even into season 9 might have had a few adventures like that. So if there's no gold or currency, there is a chart that the DM can look through for making sure that the characters are able to get their treasure and their gold at the end of the session. So that is the basics. How do you feel about a lower level character playing in a higher level game? Well, most of the Adventurers League adventures are designed for that are written specifically for the Adventurers League are designed for 8th level at tier 2. But again, as I mentioned, the DM has suggestions in those to scale it back. So if the characters are all 5th level and it's for a level 8, written for a level 8 party, then you just go with the weak or very weak options in there. Myself, I don't mind if players are a different level. As I mentioned, the only reason we're doing it specifically for our stream is because it makes it a little bit easier for just to make sure everyone's of that particular level for the adventure, and there's not any extra preparation or anything extra that we have to do in between, because obviously I have client games during the week. We have all of our streams and such, and I only have so much time in the day to prep games and such like that. So that makes it much easier to do it that way. But myself, I don't mind with the character, the 5th level character playing with 6th or 7th level characters or whatever. And it's always up to the DM. As I mentioned, I'm going to have a vastly different viewpoint than a lot of different DMs, especially DMs that are very new. DMs that, a DM can have 25 years of experience, but if they've only been playing with the same 5 or 6 players, that's 25 years of great experience. But there's also going to be a lot of things they might not have picked up or put in their toolbox because of the fact that they've played with just the same players. So it, just each DM is going to have a difference. But myself, I don't mind running, especially when I'm running virtual D&D weekends or I'm running a convention. There's no control over that. But yeah, that's the reason why we're doing it specifically for the Keys of the Golden Vault live sessions. But we are getting close to the end of the hour. Actually, we are a little over. I do have a game at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to have to be jumping off of here. Does anyone have any last minute questions before we call an end to the stream? Checking on the chat. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight for Dungeons and Deliberations, and thank you, Angelus, for pointing out that my sound was again flipped. I'm going to have to go through and change all of that around after probably tomorrow, before we have our Tavern Talks tomorrow night. Dante Shin is coming on with me. We're going to be talking about different things for our topic tomorrow evening, different things that players and dungeon masters do that might be disruptive, that they don't know necessarily disruptive, and can lead to other disruptions down the road that can, and not necessarily have a game go off kilter or anything like that, but just small things that I got the idea from playing some Dead by Daylight and other MMOs or online games where there's a lot of toxicity involved, and I want to talk about not really toxicity, as it were, but small things, disruptions that we as players and DMs do that we might not realize are actually, kind of disruptive and kind of leads to more disruptive behavior at the table. So that's our topic for tomorrow night. Of course, on Thursday and Friday, the times have changed from 1 to 3 p.m. And now the streams are from 2 to 4 p.m. And we're going to be doing dungeon delving both on Thursdays and Fridays now, where we play Lord of the Rings online on the Landrefall server. So tune in for that. Again, I can answer questions throughout the whole game if people have questions about T&D, DMing, or playing, or anything like that. That's what I'm here for. That's what we're created the channel for. And again, if you haven't followed us on any of the socials, please check down below in the About section. Any likes or subscriptions or anything you can put out there for us greatly helps out the channel. And again, we're still lagging a bit behind in getting the merch store together, but that'll be a way here very soon that you can also help out to support us with all of these projects and such. But that is going to bring us to the end of today's Dungeons and Deliberations. I'm going to go rest my voice before my game tonight. So everyone have a great evening. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night, and happy adventuring. Bye.